This week on LCARA Ham Radio, we're going to take advantage of a new checklist that KD6FTR has put together for setting up and tearing down the crossband repeaters. We're also going to take a look at our new weather covers for the CBRs and how we might go about creating a frame for setting that up. That's what's coming up this week on LCARA Ham Radio. So KD6FTR, Mike, has put together a really nice little checklist. Part of it is to check out the CBR to an individual to place it. Then we have a notes page where we can say, well, are there any discrepancies? Did we notice any damage? That sort of thing. And that can be annotated. We're not trying to place blame on anybody. We just need to know about it. Here's the actual setup checklist, and we'll go through each of these steps one by one, Chris and I both, to make sure that the checklist will work. And then we have the teardown procedure on the very last page to make sure that we have everything in place. One of the things that we have noticed over the last 2 years when we've just manually tried to set things up was that the parts would come missing. You know, you'd miss screws or radials for the GP3s or something. And we're hoping that this checklist will give us a better inventory of each CBR prior to setting up and then after we tear down, as well as to let us know if we need to make any adjustments in the future. Next, we wanted to show a cover that we've purchased off of Amazon, and we have to create a frame for this. It's literally just the canvas cover, but when these CBRs are out in the field, we need to make sure from a rain and sun perspective that we're keeping them protected. So we'll show the frame and all of that somewhere down the road. But now we're going to move into the actual checklist, and KD6FTR here is showing us the basics of the checklist, and the starting point for this is we got to check out a CBR, meaning that this is going to be given to somebody to go set up somewhere out on the course of the gravel rally, and we've got 6 positions for these CBRs that have, you know, we have GPS coordinates and all the rest from the last 2 years, and so we're actually going to check out the kits, and Mike is right now just going through and saying, well, you have this, you have this, you have this, and making sure that everything that we need is with the kit. Now, this is going to include an antenna, possibly 2 antennas, we don't know yet. It's going to include cabling, it's going to include the cover, it's going to include the frame for the cover, and the frame for the cover has to be put together so that we can keep it nice and compact. So you're looking at giving somebody an antenna with cable, a canvas bag with the cover, and a frame, and the CBR to be taken to an exact location somewhere at the start or finish of the CBR, start or finish of the gravel rally. So with some encouragement from Mike, KY4 CKP goes to work setting up the crossband repeater. The only thing that won't be really included in this setup are the 2 blue poles that we use on the drive-on mast. So we're going to attach the antenna to just the stub because of just room constraints. But Chris is going to follow the checklist to put everything together. And the first thing he's doing is making sure that the pipe that we go into the base is screwed in. Now, ultimately, that wooden plate that you see, or the wooden board, that is what we drive on top of with our vehicle. When we set up the crossband repeater, in the past, we've always driven on top of that piece of wood so that it is anchored in place. It's not going to go anywhere, even if it's windy. When these actually get placed this year, the crossband repeater itself sits on top of that board, and we may have to guy out. We don't know yet. We may have to guy out the mast made up of those blue poles. But for now, we're just going to set up just the stub on the board, and we're going to attach the antenna to the stub, as you'll see Chris demonstrating here in just a minute. Now, I'm going to intersperse myself and Chris setting up the crossband repeater. We both went through the instructions so that we had 2 good examples. Miss Wanda has gone through the instructions, and I think 1 or 2 other people Mike has given the instructions to just kind of really nail down, do we have all the verbiage in there that we need and so forth. And Mike's done an amazing job with the checklist, the notes, the checkout procedure, and the teardown procedure. The teardown procedure is just as important as the setup procedure to make sure that we don't lose things. So Chris here is getting the radials off of the mast base, or the antenna base, I should say. And as he's following his directions, he's going to attach those to the base mount, or to the antenna, actually. So Chris continues to go through the setup procedure, and as you can see, he's got the antenna base, and he's kind of looking at it. And we had some wrenches ordered. These are 8 mil and 10 mil on either side, so that we can actually tighten the nuts here on the U-bolts on the base here. And then we have a 10 mil where the antenna connects to the base, which we'll show in just a few minutes. And so Chris is going through the process of getting that ready. So at this point, we can tell that Chris has put the base and antenna on the little stub, and Mike is just, pointing out to him. And Chris hadn't detached the antenna from the base because we've got to get the cable on it. And in this current iteration of the instructions, the cable is going to be about 25 feet. Is actually going to attach to the bottom of the antenna, which then feeds through the base. We have since adjusted our thinking on this, and we're going to have the cable pre-attached to the antenna so that you do not have to take this apart. Just taking this apart takes 5-10 minutes to take it apart, get the cable attached, and then put it back together. And what we're going to do is we're going to have the cable rolled up and already pre-attached to the antenna and the base, so that Chris won't have to do this, or whoever's got the CBR that day, they won't actually have to take this part. Because this little nut, it has, a washer, a lock washer and everything. It would be very easy to lose the bolt and the lock washer out in the field if it's slightly cold or whatever. So this is actually not going to be taken apart in our next iteration. But this is why we're going through the process, is to find out where the weaknesses are and what we can adjust to speed up deployment and teardown. So now at this point, I'm going to insert some footage of me doing what Chris was doing, and I'm at the same spot, but you can see I've got the base detached from the antenna, and I'm loosening up those nuts so that I can attach the base to the little stub that we have down on the ground. Keep in mind, we're going to have 2, possibly 3 blue poles to get the antenna further up in the air, but because we're in the garage, we just didn't have that kind of height. I think we could have gotten 1 of the blue poles, or maybe 2, but we said, yay, to go through the process, we'll attach it to the stub. So that's what I'm doing. I'm reading the instructions Mike has put together, and then I'm going to attach this piece to the stub. In the actual deployment, we'll have those blue poles, and we'll be attaching this to the blue pole that we'll use at the very top where the antenna is going to be. And so at this point, I'm actually now putting the base onto the little stub here. Normally this would go on the actual pole, and tightening up our nuts with our handy dandy wrench. And we're only going to need 1 tool when we set up these CBRs, which is really nice. Now the next piece is to get the cabling and then the antenna mounted to the base. So Chris is going to go through unrolling the cable. Now we have made a determination that we're actually going to have this pre-assembled. So Chris won't actually have to install the cable on the end of the antenna, then feed that through the base. And so what he's doing now is he's going to feed the cabling through the base, which I'm not doing a very good job of showing. And then he's going to attach this end of the cable to the antenna. We've since decided, let's go ahead and have this part already done. We won't have the radials on there, that will still be done out in the field, but we'll have the cable connected and already run through the base, and the screw that keeps the antenna and the base together, we'll have that all pre-assembled. So Chris is going to go back to his handy dandy checklist and just make sure that, again, he's following the directions that Mike has laid out. We're also checking the boxes out to the left just to say this is where we are at the setup process. Now, we also want to have actual training on this very same procedure once we get things locked down to pretty much how we're going to do it. And so right now, again, we're just doing this to get the checklist pretty darn close, and then we're going to have a hands-on event. Our club has every 3rd Thursday of the month a hands-on where we do training, we build things, stuff like that. We're actually going to train folks to go and set up the CBR out in the field. Now, this is the fiddly part that we're not going to have in the final release. All of this is going to be put together. All the person would have to do is attach the base to one of the blue poles, and he won't actually have to remove the antenna from the base and attach the cable. That will all be pre-done, so to speak. The cable will be rolled up and shortened, if you will, but the antenna base and cable will be all pre-assembled and ready to take out into the field. So this part is going to save us some time because we won't actually be doing this. And that's one of the things we learned. Alrighty, so now we have the antenna connected to the drive-on mast and so forth. We've gone through those steps minus the blue poles. You'll see us a couple of times just kind of ghosting a motion just to say that we did that because we didn't have the blue poles at that point. We were just going through the checklist by and large. So now we're switching over to the crossband repeater. We need to open up the case and we need to pull the crossband repeater out of the case. The crossband repeater and the case here are going to sit on top of the drive-on mast plate down at the bottom, the wooden base, if you will. And we have this diplexer already connected to the radios. We want to double check that, again, it's connected correctly because there's a UHF side and a VHF side. And so we're in the process of just double checking that. The other end will be the cable coming from the antenna. We'll go to the SO239 on the end that doesn't have anything connected to it at the moment, so that the antenna is connected to the diplexer, which is then connected to the two radios. So I'm just giving myself a little bit of cabling here. It's already connected to the antenna, just like Chris showed you just a moment ago. And Chris went through this step as well, but we're just showing me at this point just to have some difference. So now we've got the diplexer connected to the radios, and we also have it connected to the antennas. Now, right now, we're using one antenna. In years past, we've gotten away with just using one GP3 antenna from Comet. We may end up using Yagis in a couple of places, but further testing this year will ultimately help us decide whether we need two antennas or not. But for this testing process, we are just connecting one antenna to the two radios. The next piece on the checklist is powering on the CBR. So there's a red master switch there in the top left corner that's you can just see it peeking out above my finger there, just to the right of my finger. That was turned on. Then we turned on the radios, and then the checklist ensures that we actually choose the right frequency for that crossband repeater for whatever location it's going in. So I'm pressing the buttons on the front, following the directions on the checklist, either P1 or P3 on these radios, to make sure that they're on the right 2-meter frequency and on the right 70 centimeter frequency. So just finishing up here, making sure we're on the right frequencies. We're also on the right power. These radios have 3 power settings, low 1, low 2, and I think high. And for now, we're going to try low 1 out in the field just to see if we can get by with just that much power. If we need to increase the power, we will. We've got 2 additional higher power settings. But we're hoping we can get by with just low power. That will also absolutely ensure the battery is going to last as long as we need it. It is a 15-amp lithium battery for those of you that may not have seen some of the earlier parts to this series. And it should be fine even if we ran it high power, but we need to do a little bit more further testing on duty cycle. So I'm just finishing up here at this point. We've got the CBR basically set up. We're making sure that it's on the right frequencies. We're making sure that everything is connected correctly. The next thing we're going to do is take a couple of radios in this setup, and we're going to make sure that it is crossbanding. We had a couple of radios that were not, and in Chris's last video, we showed you how one little daub of solder prevented the crossband from working in one direction. So we're testing 2-meter to 70 centimeter, and then Miss Wanda, I believe, is testing 70 centimeter to 2-meter. It might have been the other way around, but we're just testing. Is it crossbanding? Now, we're so close to everything, we're getting tone and some unwanted noise, but by and large, we can hear each other, and in our formal testing, we'll be much further away. So at this point, we also added a couple of instructions because we know we're going to be using the covers out in the field. So Chris has pinned that in. We need to add setting up the cover over the crossband repeater once it's been set up and is ready to go. And that includes the cover itself plus the frame. We're going to make sure that putting the frame together is going to be, dead easy. So we've included that, and Chris has added that. Now, what Chris has done at this point is he's going to the very end of the checklist. This is the teardown portion of the checklist. And so at this point, he's removing power from the kit so that that's not still live. Powered off the radios, remove the power on the master switch, and he's disconnecting the antenna now from the diplexer on the back of the radios. And again, what we try to do is check and then do something, check and then do something. Don't try to do 2 or 3 things in a row thinking that you're saving yourself some time. We want when we train on this, we want to make sure everybody follows the individual bullet points one at a time so that it's done the same way each and every time. So Chris is now putting the CBR back into its case as if we're tearing it down. You can see mounted on that plate, this is very easy to set up. All of the components are on that bottom base board, if you will. And then we also have the charging cables and so forth in every CBR. So he's putting that back in. And then we close the lid. And basically from a CBR perspective, it's packed. Now, we would then have to take the weather cover and fold that and then put it back in its bag and then tear down the frame for the cover, put it back in its bag. So we're going to have a canvas bag for the canvas weather cover and the frame that we're going to be setting up. That part is not in our video, but that will be in a later iteration. So Chris is double checking everything at this point. So the next part of the teardown is to remove the antenna from the blue pole, the mast that we're creating on the drive-on mast. Again, we didn't use the blue poles here due to space constraints inside the garage, but he's loosening up. Now, again, this will be a step that we're not actually going to have to do. So this is removing the antenna from the base. We're actually going to leave the antenna base put together, the cable connected to the antenna, and all we'll have to do is just roll up the cabling once we've disconnected it from the CBR, and then we're going to use Velcro straps to keep that cable nice and coiled up. So all he'll have to do is actually loosen the nuts on the U-bolts, the U-clamps there, that attach it to the base, or in this case, the little stub, but which would actually be one of the blue poles that fits over this. So now Chris is going to remove the base from this little stub here, which would normally be on one of the blue poles. We're thinking 2 to 3 poles. Now, we've been using 2 poles that fit over top of this stub nice and snugly, which is really nice. Chris put this design together from some stuff that he had seen. And we've been using this design now for a couple of years. And so the blue poles that you're not seeing in our video today, there'll be at least 2. That gets it about 12 feet up in the air, but we're thinking possibly 3 poles to get it about 18 feet in the air. We just don't know. With the emergency communications trailer going to be in a new location, we're not sure how much actual height we might need until we actually test it. But that's what's missing here. He's just taking it off the stub. But normally we'd have 2 to 3 of the blue poles that attach together to give us our height. So now the base is removed, and one more checkbox can be added to his list. And it'll be at this point that Chris is going to attach the radials that he's removed from the antenna to the base. Keep in mind the base won't actually be detached from the antenna. And we have a cloth strap for this, but we're going to do, I think, Velcro in the future. Those straps are not, there's nothing wrong with them, and they help us get an idea of the process, but Velcro is just so much easier. So we're going to go with Velcro straps for that in the future. Chris is double checking his checklist. And you can see that he's going one by one just to see if the checklist is accurate. And then he's going to reattach the base to the antenna, which again, in point of fact, will no longer have to be done. So we'll skip this. So basically, to finish the teardown, he's just now putting a cloth rope around the cabling And again, this will probably be a Velcro strap in the future. And he's essentially done. So keep in mind, everything that was required for teardown is to power off the radios, master power off on the CBR kit itself, put everything about the CBR back in its case here, then technically tear down the weather cover and its frame before you tear down the CBR. Weather cover and frame, CBR, and then the antenna base cabling from the masts and the drive-on mast. And then the last thing to really take apart is the drive-on mast, the base, and the pipe that fits into the base. And so Chris is finishing up the CBR check piece here, and then the very last thing that he'll go to is the piece of pipe and the drive-on mast base. So you can see we've got that now being done and going to be done expertly. And all of this will be loaded up in whoever the ham is in their vehicle, the antenna cabling, the CBR, and a canvas bag that has the weather bag, the weather cover, and the frame and so forth. And that person will be done. And then this will go back to the emergency communications trailer for check-in. And whoever does the check-in will go through and make sure that all the pieces, parts, and so forth are there. Are there any notes on this sheet showing any damage and that sort of thing? I can't emphasize enough how wonderful this experience was, and have Chris and I go through these checklists one at a time without any help, and making sure that everything is going to flow. And having two other sets of eyeballs, Don and Mike, just watching us and seeing if there's anywhere we can improve the process. Having the cable pre-attached to the antenna and the base pre-attached and all that came out of this. Going to Velcro straps instead of the rope or the cotton straps that Don loves to use, that came out of this. It's just an alternative. Lots of things come out of just going through the process multiple times. And then when we do some of the training with our other hams in our club, probably a little more fine-tuning will come out of it. And when we go and deploy these in the actual field, a little more fine-tuning will come out of this. So, I'm happy. And there we have it. KD6FTR Mike is happy. Happy Mike, a happy ham. So, as I'm hoping you can see, Chris and I have put together the series so you can kind of see how the CBR build came together. And then ultimately, you got to go use these things. And you want to make sure that the setup and teardown is going to be easy. And the best way to make that easy is to have a checklist that people can follow. With a little bit of training. It's not, rocket science, but with a little bit of training of just going through the checklist, it'll be made even easier. And over time, we won't lose as many parts. The crossband repeaters will be set up correctly the right way the first time, every time. And we are using different frequencies in different zones of the gravel rally, but also these crossband repeaters can be used for other events like 5Ks and things like that. You won't need all 6 of them, but we'll have 1 or 2 of these out in the field to ensure that our handy talkies have even greater range going into the repeater. We can run in lower power and all that other good stuff. And having the checklist will benefit us each and every time one of these crossband repeaters is taken out into the field. And this becomes all of 7 of these. Of course, we have an extra for a spare. All 7 of these will get used throughout the year, both for training activities and whatnot. Is your club taking on projects like this? We hope we are providing you some inspiration and showing you what you could do. Not only the build of these kits, but also the setup and teardown and putting the checklist together and fine-tuning the process. Each and every one of these steps makes us better hams. And if there's one thing that AC4DM has talked about in the 5 years plus that Chris and I have known him, is that you just count on the weather being bad. And if the weather's bad, can you still do this in a little bit of rain or what have you? This is in late April, but it's not uncommon for us to get a cold snap in late April. And can we set all of this out in the field even when the weather is not that great? They're still going to run the rally, and that means we still have to get this equipment out there and protect it. We hope you enjoy this series. We'll have more coming up here in the very near future. We got to get out into the field. We're actually going to go do some testing in our new location for the emergency communications trailer. That'll be coming up next probably in the next video or two, so stay tuned. This is KY4BDP Brian for the Lake Cumberland Amateur Radio Association. Thanks for watching, and 73.